Henry, looking at Europe, is there a specific focus or specific recommendation that would be the EU should be looking at?
We do have some thoughts there. One thought we have is I think the EU has an opportunity to help lead the world in what we might think of as open government. There's a great deal of not only purchasing done by governments, but also a great deal of data collected by governments that could be exposed very, very widely.
Data like?
Everything on data on households, data on consumption, energy use patterns, peak energy consumption, travel, congestion, all these things. And by bringing that data out into the public and having many, many people look at the data, you can come up with some marvelous solutions that, from a bottom-up perspective, that wouldn't have emerged from top-down. And so this idea of open data, open government is a real opportunity, and I think the EU, particularly because of its greater focus on privacy, will lead the world in getting this right.
Okay, all right. So if you had one thing that you could have the EU do out of all of the stuff we've been talking about, or other things, what would it be? What's the most important thing to
Well, one
get
thing we
this
have not
innovation
talked
going?
about yet that I think has a lot of opportunity is to, by strengthening the protection of intellectual property, we can actually promote trading of intellectual property, more liquidity in the use and reuse of intellectual property.
That sounds counterintuitive. That, I mean, by strengthening the IP, you can promote more trading of it.
Exactly. By making something that can be, gives it strength. Remember that relay race.
Yeah.
The baton that's being passed, part of what's in that baton is not only the idea, but the protection for that idea.
Right.
And by having that change hands multiple times, that idea can perhaps advance faster or take different directions from what it would do inside a single organization. But in order for that to happen, we actually have to have institutions that promote the exchange of intellectual property. So think of secondary markets, if you like.
Right.
Somebody that receives a patent, but then actually, under certain conditions, collaborates or even sells on the patent to somebody else for further use. An example in pharmaceuticals would be that when companies develop a new drug, they typically will explore a number of compounds for every drug that goes to the market. All of those drugs that are explored are patented, which means nobody else gets to use them. So even though they will pursue one drug out of 100, the other 99 are blocked for everybody else to use. So if we had a secondary market under which those compounds could be made available, and in turn people who want to explore those compounds for other use could, with the right transaction, be able to carry those forward, that would be something that would be socially very beneficial and get more value and more use out of the intellectual property.
Okay, so that's yours. David, your wish list, the number one thing that could be done to promote and improve the climate for open innovation in Europe.
So I think what I might just do is start with what I think some of the challenges
you have more
in
than
Europe.
one. All right, go
well,
ahead.
no, I'll end up with one.
Okay.
But I'll start off with, I mean, I think some difficult things to strike a balance on in Europe are the balance between competition and collaboration, if you want to call it that. And so, you know, competition is itself a great driver of innovation. And so supporting competition, whilst at the same time supporting some of these more collaborative activities, how do you strike that balance? How do you do that? I think that's a challenge. And I think it's, I mean, I would say that different parts of the world feel, say, more competitive. And others feel much more collaborative. So striking that balance is quite important. The second thing is that Europe, I think people would generally say that venture capital is and private equity is somewhat weaker in Europe than, for example, in America. And this is a big driver of the process. It's a big part of the relay race to which Henry referred. So that's the second thing. And then the third thing is that there are quite a lot of things that work very well within the nations in Europe. And so the question is, how do you make sure that what you provide for the whole of Europe is really additive, if you like? So this, I mean, people call it different things, subsidiarity and those sorts of things. So deciding, you know, what are the really big things to drive, if you like, at the European Union level, and what things, frankly, can carry on quite happily without any assistance in the various nations in Europe, as part of the innovation ecosystem here. That's another one that I think one has to think carefully about how you strike the balance. But to answer your question, at the end of the day, I agree with Henry. In other words, okay. A strong and simple intellectual property regime across Europe would be a massive enabler of the mobility of ideas, and I'd support that with mobility of the people as well. This is a massive driver of innovation.
Well, but my word, I mean, the European Union has been trying for more than 30 years to reform the IP system here. The Commission has proposed this countless times. What are the odds that this will happen, do you think?
I cannot predict. I just cannot predict. The fact that they've been trying to do it for 30 years suggests to me that they must have thought it's worthwhile. Yes. It's pretty consistent.
And in truth, they have been acting a lot on it lately.
I'll just draw an analogy here. My own experience of negotiating intellectual property with a single institution is that can be pretty tricky. So I can understand that sort of dealing with the whole of the topic against all of Europe, there'll be lots of different ideas as to the right answer. I can understand it's difficult, but I think it's worth it.
Okay, all right. Well, thank you very much, both of you. We will be releasing the results of your research in a few months, actually. And I will be looking forward to reading that and debating it in Brussels and elsewhere. Thank you very much to David Eyton from BP and Henry Chesbrough from Berkeley and ESADE Business School. Thank you.